A black girl stands in the middle of a packed courtroom, her eyes locked on the judge. Her voice shakes, but her words cut through the tension like a knife. "You're my daddy." The room gasps. The judge freezes, his stoic facade shattering as emotions flood his face. This isn't just a legal case, this is a moment that will change lives forever. But how did she find him? And what shocking truths are waiting to come out? As the walls of his carefully guarded past begin to crumble, one question remains. Will this reunion bring healing or expose wounds too deep to repair? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors as Judge Nathaniel Carter adjusted his black robes. His fingers smoothed down the fabric with practiced precision, a ritual that usually brought him comfort before entering his domain. Today felt different, though. There was a heaviness in the air that he couldn't quite explain. The courtroom doors opened with a soft creak as he made his way to the bench. The usual buzz of whispered conversations fell to a respectful hush. Judge Carter's eyes swept across the packed gallery, taking in the familiar faces of lawyers and social workers until they landed on an unexpected sight. A small figure sitting alone in the front row. Veronica sat perfectly still, her feet barely touching the ground from the oversized wooden bench. Her neat braids were tied with purple ribbons, and her pressed violet dress spoke of someone's careful attention to her appearance for court. But it was her eyes that caught the judge's attention, wise beyond their years, watching everything with quiet intensity. "All rise," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. The Honorable Judge Nathaniel Carter, presiding. As everyone settled back into their seats, Clara Newman, the social worker, approached the podium. Her arms were laden with manila folders, and dark circles under her eyes suggested long nights spent preparing for this case. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but tired, "we're here today regarding the custody determination for Veronica Thompson, age 8. She gestured toward the little girl, who seemed to shrink slightly at becoming the center of attention. Judge Carter nodded, maintaining his composed exterior while something tugged at his heart. "Proceed, Ms. Newman." For the next few hours, the judge listened as lawyers and social workers painted Veronica's life in cold, bureaucratic terms. Foster placement statistics, background checks, system protocols. Through it all, Veronica sat quietly, her small hand occasionally dipping into her dress pocket to touch something hidden there. "The current foster family is at capacity," one lawyer argued, shuffling through papers. "The maternal aunt in Georgia hasn't responded to our inquiries," another countered. Judge Carter raised his hand, silencing the squabbling attorneys. "Ms. Newman, what does Veronica herself say about her preferences?" Clara glanced at her notes. "She's been very quiet, Your Honor. Understandably reserved given the circumstances." The judge's gaze returned to Veronica. Something about her demeanor, her dignity in the face of such uncertainty, stirred something deep within him. He noticed how she clutched her pocket, and years of experience told him she was holding on to something precious. As the afternoon wore on, the air in the courtroom grew stuffy with tension. The legal arguments continued, but Judge Carter found his attention repeatedly drawn to Veronica. She remained stoic, but he caught glimpses of emotions flickering across her face. Hope, fear, resignation, as the adults around her debated her future. "Your Honor," Clara Newman spoke up again, "given the complexity of this case and the limited placement options currently available, we request additional time to explore alternative solutions." Judge Carter felt an uncomfortable tightness in his throat. He'd seen too many children shuffled through the system, their needs lost in a maze of legal procedures and overworked social services. Looking at Veronica, he saw not just another case number, but a child whose entire world hung in the balance. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9, he announced, his deep voice carrying authority tinged with something softer. "This court needs time to review all options thoroughly." His gavel fell with a decisive crack, but the sound brought him no satisfaction today. As the courtroom began to empty, Judge Carter watched Veronica finally pull the item from her pocket. A worn photograph that she studied with intense focus. Even from his position on the bench, he could see the care with which she handled this precious connection to her past. The next morning dawned with a heavy stillness in courtroom 7A. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Judge Nathaniel Carter stood in his chambers, straightening his robes with trembling fingers. Something felt off balance today, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis. As he entered the courtroom, the usual formalities played out. The bailiff's "all rise" echoed off the walls, followed by the shuffle of feet and rustling papers. But when Judge Carter's eyes found Veronica in her usual spot, something in her expression made him pause. The little girl sat straighter today, her shoulders squared with determination he hadn't seen before. "We're here to continue the custody hearing for Veronica Thompson," he began, his deep voice steady despite the strange tension in his chest. "Ms. Newman, you may proceed with—" "Wait!" The small voice cut through the formal atmosphere like a thunderclap. Everyone turned to stare as Veronica stood up, her hands gripping the wooden barrier in front of her. The worn photograph she always kept close was clutched tightly in one hand. "Your Honor," Clara Newman started, rising quickly. "I apologize for the interruption." But Veronica's voice came again, stronger this time, though it trembled slightly. "You're my daddy, Judge Nathaniel Carter." The words hung in the air like suspended glass, threatening to shatter the very foundation of the courtroom. Gasps erupted from the gallery, followed by furious whispers. Judge Carter's hands gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles turning white beneath his dark skin. "Order," he managed to say, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Order in the court." Clara Newman had rushed to Veronica's side, placing a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. The child's eyes never left Judge Carter's face, and in them, he saw a desperate hope that made his heart constrict. "This is highly irregular," one of the lawyers sputtered, jumping to his feet. "Your Honor, we need to address this immediately." Another attorney chimed in. "We demand immediate verification of this claim. This changes everything about the case." Judge Carter barely heard them. His mind raced back through the years to a time before law school, before his carefully constructed life. To Maria. Maria with her bright smile and fierce spirit. Maria who had disappeared without a word. "Your Honor?" Clara Newman's gentle voice broke through his thoughts. "How do you wish to proceed?" He noticed his hands were shaking and quickly lowered them beneath his desk. Veronica still stood, holding out the photograph now. Even from this distance, he could see the edges were worn soft from constant handling. I am ordering an immediate DNA test," he managed, his judicial training taking over when all else failed. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "This court will suspend proceedings until we have verification of—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The bailiff moved forward, gently guiding Veronica toward the side door. She went quietly, but kept looking back at Judge Carter, her eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to answer. "Court is adjourned until further notice," he announced, rising abruptly. The gavel fell from his trembling hand, clattering against the wooden bench. Without meeting anyone's eyes, Judge Nathaniel Carter turned and strode quickly toward his chambers, his robes billowing behind him like a shield against the chaos he left in his wake. Behind him he could hear the eruption of voices, the scrambling of lawyers, and Clara Newman's gentle murmur as she spoke to Veronica. But all he could focus on was reaching the sanctuary of his chambers, where he could finally let his carefully maintained composure crumble in private. Judge Nathaniel Carter sat alone in his chambers, sunlight streaming through the tall windows onto his mahogany desk. The sealed envelope from the medical laboratory felt heavy in his hands. He traced the official letterhead with his finger, his heart thundering against his ribs. With careful movements, he broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The medical terminology blurred before his eyes until he found what he was looking for. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The paper trembled in his grip. "Maria," he whispered into the empty room. Memories he'd locked away for years came rushing back. Her infectious laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, their shared dreams over late-night coffee. Then came the morning she was just gone. No note, no explanation, no goodbye. A knock at the door startled him. "Come in," he called, quickly composing himself. Clara Newman entered, her expression sympathetic. "Judge Carter, I thought you might want to discuss the results." He nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "She's mine," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "Veronica is my daughter." Clara settled into the chair, placing her thick case file on the desk between them. "There's something else you need to know about Maria," she said gently. "The accident happened 6 months ago. It was quick. She didn't suffer." Judge Carter closed his eyes. Grief for a woman he'd once loved mingling with anger at the secrets she'd kept. Why didn't she tell me? The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. "We found this in Maria's personal effects," Clara said, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. "It was addressed to Veronica, to be opened when she turned 18. But, given the circumstances..." With unsteady hands, Judge Carter opened the letter. Maria's familiar handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Veronica, I know you'll have questions about your father. His name is Nathaniel Carter, and he is a good man. I made the choice to leave without telling him about you, and that burden is mine alone to bear. I was young and scared, convinced I'd hold him back from his dreams of becoming a judge. I know now that I was wrong, but fear has a way of making us do foolish things." Judge Carter couldn't read anymore. He carefully folded the letter and slipped it back into its envelope. Later that afternoon, in a quieter than usual courtroom, Judge Carter sat not at his usual place on the bench, but at the defendant's table. Another judge presided over the temporary custody hearing, while Veronica sat with Clara nearby. "Given the extraordinary circumstances," the presiding judge announced, "and pending further review, temporary custody of Veronica Thompson will be granted to her biological father, Nathaniel Carter." Judge Carter turned to look at Veronica. She clutched her mother's photograph, her eyes meeting his with a mix of hope and uncertainty. He recognized Maria's features in her face, the same determined chin, the same expressive eyes. "The court will reconvene in 30 days to review the arrangement," the judge continued. But Judge Carter barely heard the words. His whole world had shifted in the space of a few days. The carefully ordered life he'd built, his unwavering dedication to justice and protocol, all of it seemed to pale in comparison to the responsibility now before him. He was no longer just Judge Nathaniel Carter. He was a father to a little girl who had lost everything else. Veronica's small voice broke through his thoughts. "Can I keep my mom's picture in my room?" she asked softly, her first words to him since the DNA results arrived. "Of course you can," he replied, his voice gentle. "Your mother will always be part of who you are." Judge Nathaniel Carter's key trembled slightly as he unlocked his front door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his pristine hardwood floors as he stepped aside, allowing Veronica to enter first. Her small frame hesitated at the threshold, one hand clutching the strap of her worn backpack. "Please come in," he said softly, trying to infuse warmth into his usually authoritative voice. "This is your home now, too." Veronica took a tentative step forward, her sneakers barely making a sound on the immaculate floor. Her wide eyes took in the stark white walls, the carefully arranged furniture, and the complete absence of any personal touches. The living room looked more like a furniture showroom than a lived-in space. "Your room is upstairs," Judge Carter explained, gesturing toward the staircase. "Would you like to see it?" Veronica nodded silently, following him up the stairs while maintaining a careful distance. The guest room, now her room, was as pristine as the rest of the house, with crisp white bedding and empty shelves waiting to be filled. "We can get some things to make it more..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Yours." Later in the kitchen, Judge Carter found himself staring into his refrigerator, reality hitting him hard. His usual routine of late-night microwave dinners wouldn't suffice anymore. He managed to cobble together a simple meal of spaghetti and marinara sauce, something he hoped an 8-year-old would eat. The dining room table, usually home to case files and legal briefs, now hosted their first dinner together. Veronica sat ramrod straight in her chair, her feet dangling above the floor. The only sound was the quiet scraping of her fork against the plate as she pushed the pasta around. "Do you like spaghetti?" Judge Carter asked, breaking the heavy silence. "Or perhaps there's something else you prefer?" Veronica's eyes darted to her backpack propped against the wall. He knew Maria's photograph was inside, her most precious possession. "Mom made good mac and cheese," she whispered, then immediately looked down at her plate. Before Judge Carter could respond, the doorbell rang. Clara Newman stood on his doorstep, her familiar professional smile in place. "Just checking in," she said, stepping inside. "How are we doing?" They moved to the living room, where Veronica perched on the edge of the leather sofa, still within arm's reach of her backpack. Clara sat across from them, her notebook open on her lap. "Remember Judge Carter," Clara said, her tone gentle but firm. "Social services will conduct their evaluation in 2 weeks. They'll be looking for signs of adjustment, bonding, and stability." Judge Carter nodded, feeling the weight of scrutiny on his shoulders. His courtroom confidence seemed to have abandoned him in his own home. "What exactly are they looking for?" "They want to see that Veronica feels safe and supported," Clara explained, glancing at the little girl. "That means creating a nurturing environment, establishing routines, and most importantly, building trust." Veronica's hand crept toward her backpack, and Judge Carter noticed how her shoulders tensed when adults discussed her future. It was a gesture he'd seen countless times in his courtroom, children trying to make themselves invisible while others decided their fate. The morning light filtered through the living room windows, casting a gentle glow across Judge Carter's austere furniture. He sat in his usual armchair, reviewing case files, when he noticed Veronica hovering at the edge of the room. She held something in her small hands, fidgeting with whatever it was as she gathered her courage. "Good morning, Veronica," he said, setting his papers aside. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, taking a few tentative steps forward. "Mom used to tell me stories about you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said my daddy was a man of justice." Judge Carter's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward, careful to keep his movements slow and gentle. "What else did she tell you?" Veronica's fingers tightened around what she was holding. "She said you always tried to do what was right, even when it was hard." She extended her hand, revealing a worn photograph. "This helped me find you." Judge Carter accepted the photograph with trembling fingers. The image showed a younger version of himself and Maria at a community picnic, both smiling broadly at the camera. His black judicial robes were nowhere in sight. Instead, he wore a casual polo shirt, and Maria's sundress caught the summer breeze. The colors had faded, but the joy in their expressions remained vivid. "Mom kept it in her special box," Veronica explained, watching his face carefully. "When I saw you in the courtroom, you looked just like in the picture. That's how I knew." They moved to his study where Judge Carter examined the photograph more closely. Memories flooded back. Maria's infectious laugh, her passion for teaching, the way she could light up any room. How had he let her slip away? "Your mother was an extraordinary woman," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wish I had known about you sooner, Veronica. I promise you, I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Veronica's face brightened slightly at his words, though caution still lingered in her eyes. Outside, the steady hum of traffic filtered through the windows, a reminder of the world beyond their quiet moment. "Would you like to read together?" Judge Carter asked, remembering how Clara had emphasized the importance of bonding activities. "Did your mom have any favorite stories she shared with you?" "She liked fairy tales," Veronica replied, showing the first real spark of enthusiasm he'd seen, especially Cinderella. Judge Carter found an old collection of fairy tales on his bookshelf, and they settled on the living room couch. He opened the book, and Veronica sat close enough that he could see the worn photograph peeking out of her pocket, her tangible connection to both her parents. As he began reading, his judicial voice softened into a gentler tone. "Once upon a time," he started, and noticed how Veronica's shoulders gradually relaxed. She didn't quite lean against him, maintaining a small but significant gap between them, but her eyes followed the words on the page with genuine interest. The afternoon sun warmed the room as Judge Carter continued reading, his measured voice bringing the familiar story to life. Though Veronica kept her physical distance, her emotional walls began to lower ever so slightly. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a beginning, a quiet moment of connection between a father and daughter finding their way toward each other. The courthouse steps buzzed with activity as news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the morning sky. Camera crews jostled for position while reporters clutched their microphones, their faces eager for the next big story. Among them stood Judge Angela Morrison, her perfectly tailored suit and calculated smile a stark contrast to the chaos around her. "Of course, I can't reveal my sources," she murmured to a reporter, her voice dripping with false concern. "But don't you find it concerning that a sitting judge would hide the existence of his own child? One has to wonder about his judgment in other cases involving children." The reporter scribbled furiously in his notepad, while Judge Morrison's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She had waited years for an opportunity to undermine Judge Carter's reputation, and now it had fallen right into her lap. Inside his office, Judge Carter stood at the window, his shoulders tense as he watched the media circus below. The morning news played quietly on his desktop computer, where his face appeared alongside speculation about his newly discovered daughter. The headlines seemed to mock him: "Judge's secret child raises questions," and "Custody judge's hidden past exposed." Clara Newman entered without knocking, her face etched with concern. "Judge Carter, Social Services is worried about the media attention. This kind of exposure could be traumatic for Veronica, especially given her history." He turned from the window, his expression grave. "Her history?" Clara hesitated, glancing at the door where Veronica sat in the hallway. "There were complications in her previous foster placements. The details are sealed, but she's been through more than any child should." Judge Carter's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much from Veronica's cautious behavior, but hearing it confirmed made his heart ache. Through the open door, he could see her small figure perched on a bench, her legs swinging slightly as she waited. "We need to get her home," he said firmly. "This circus isn't good for her." The drive home was tense, with Judge Carter taking back roads to avoid the reporters who had somehow discovered his address. Veronica sat quietly in the back seat, her reflection in the rearview mirror showing eyes that seemed too old for her young face. As they entered his house, Judge Carter noticed how Veronica's shoulders remained hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. He guided her to the living room, where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. "Veronica," he said gently, kneeling to meet her eye level, "I want you to know something important. No matter what you hear or see on TV, no matter what anyone says, you're safe here. I promise you that." She studied his face with that careful, measuring look he was beginning to recognize. "The people with cameras were talking about us," she said softly. "They seemed angry." "They're just curious," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "But they don't matter. What matters is that we're here together, and I'm going to protect you." A small frown creased Veronica's forehead. "That's what other people said too," she whispered, and the weight of those words hung heavy in the air between them. Before Judge Carter could respond, his phone buzzed with another news alert. More questions about his fitness as a judge, more speculation about his past relationship with Maria, more doubt cast on his ability to care for a child. He silenced the phone, watching as Veronica retreated to the window seat, her usual spot when she needed to feel safe. The morning sun cast long shadows through the blinds as Judge Nathaniel Carter peeked between the slats. Across the street, a man with a camera tried to look casual while leaning against a parked car. The judge's jaw tightened. They were getting bolder, these journalists, camping out near his home like vultures waiting for scraps. He turned from the window to find Veronica already dressed for school, her backpack clutched tightly against her chest. Her eyes met his with quiet understanding, and something in his heart twisted at how quickly she'd learned to be watchful. "Ready for school, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice light. The word sweetheart still felt new on his tongue, but he was trying. Veronica nodded, her small fingers gripping the backpack straps. "Are we going the special way again?" "That's right." He managed a reassuring smile. The special way meant taking the back roads, avoiding main streets where news vans might lurk. It added 20 minutes to their journey, but it kept Veronica away from prying eyes and intrusive questions. During the drive, he noticed Veronica humming softly to herself, a new development that made his heart lift. It was a simple tune, probably from a children's show, but it felt like progress. A week ago, she'd been completely silent during their car rides. Later that morning, Judge Carter sat in his private office at the courthouse, where Clara Newman's expression made his stomach sink before she even spoke. "There are irregularities in Veronica's foster care records," she said, spreading several folders across his desk. "Files that should be there aren't, and some of the existing documents have been sealed with unusual authorization codes." The judge leaned forward, frowning at the paperwork. "How unusual?" "I've never seen these codes before," Clara admitted, pointing to a string of numbers. "And I've been in the system for 15 years. The timing is suspicious, too. These files were sealed just months before Maria's accident." Judge Carter's fingers drummed against his desk. Someone deliberately buried this information, but who would have that kind of access, and why? Clara shook her head. "I don't know. But Judge Carter, whatever's in those missing files, someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it." By afternoon, Judge Carter needed space to think. He found himself in a small cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse, where the regulars knew better than to stare. His coffee grew cold as he scrolled through old court documents on his tablet, searching for Maria's name in case files from years ago. His phone buzzed again, the 5th news outlet today requesting an interview. He declined without looking at the message. The screen showed 15 missed calls, most from unknown numbers. Journalists were relentless, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a story. Maria's name jumped out from an old custody hearing transcript. He remembered her now, sitting in his courtroom years ago, her testimony clear and honest about a difficult custody case. She'd impressed him with her integrity, leading to their brief relationship. How could he have known she was carrying his child when she disappeared? Judge Carter set down his tablet, rubbing his tired eyes. The missing files in Veronica's history nagged at him. Someone with considerable influence had tampered with official records, and that same someone might not want those secrets exposed. He thought of Veronica's quiet resilience, her careful ways, and felt a surge of protective determination. Whatever truth lay hidden in those sealed documents, he would find it, for her sake. The morning light filtered through the curtains as Veronica sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her small fingers tracing the edges of the worn photograph. Judge Nathaniel Carter watched her for a moment from the doorway, noting how her shoulders tensed slightly when she sensed his presence. "Would you like to tell me about her?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. Veronica's eyes remained fixed on the photo. "Mama used to say you were different from the others, that you weren't afraid to do what's right." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Judge Carter's throat tightened. "Your mother was a very brave woman." "She cried a lot at night," Veronica continued, her words coming slower now. "Sometimes people would come to our apartment. Mama would make me hide in the closet and stay really quiet." Judge Carter's judicial instincts stirred. "What kind of people, Veronica?" "Men in suits, they talked loud." Veronica's fingers gripped the photograph tighter. "Mama said never to trust them, even if they acted nice. She said they weren't really nice at all." The judge felt a chill run down his spine. He watched as Veronica's lower lip trembled slightly. "One time I heard Mama arguing with them. She was saying no over and over. The men got really mad." Veronica's voice cracked. "After they left, Mama hugged me for a long time. She said we might have to go away soon." Judge Carter fought the urge to pull her into his arms, knowing she needed space to share at her own pace. "You're safe now, Veronica. No one will hurt you here." Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Angela Morrison's heels clicked purposefully across the marble floor as she approached the records department. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the counter as she waited for the clerk to look up. "I need all case files involving Maria Rodriguez from the past decade," she said, her voice honey-sweet, but her eyes sharp as steel. The clerk, a tired-looking man with coffee stains on his sleeve, shifted uncomfortably. "Those files would need proper authorization, Your Honor." Morrison's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, but surely we can expedite things. After all, this concerns Judge Carter's situation." She leaned forward slightly. "Any files you find, send them directly to my chambers. It would be a shame if budget cuts affected your department's overtime hours." The clerk's face paled slightly as he nodded. Later that afternoon, Judge Carter sat in his parked car near a small playground, watching Veronica swing back and forth with measured pushes. Her earlier words echoed in his mind, painting a disturbing picture of Maria's final months. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found a name he hadn't called in years, a former investigator known for his discretion and thoroughness. The cursor hovered over the number as he watched Veronica pump her legs on the swing, her face serious with concentration. Their eyes met across the playground, and in that moment Judge Carter saw something in Veronica's gaze that went beyond her 8 years. A wisdom born from keeping secrets, from learning too young that the world wasn't always safe. He nodded slightly, and she returned the gesture, a silent understanding passing between them. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he pressed the call button, knowing that whatever truth lay in Maria's past, it was time to bring it into the light. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nathaniel Carter's study as he sat at his desk, staring at his phone. The number hadn't changed in 5 years, but his finger hesitated over the call button. Detective Marcus Hale, his brother by blood but practically a stranger now, was his best chance at uncovering the truth. Nathaniel took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Hale speaking. "Marcus, it's Nathaniel." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken history. "Well, this is unexpected," Marcus finally replied, his tone careful and measured. "Last time we spoke was at Mom's funeral." "I need your help, Marcus. It's complicated." Nathaniel's voice softened. "There's a little girl involved. My daughter." A sharp intake of breath came through the line. "Your what?" "I just found out myself. She's 8 years old and there's something wrong with her case files. Things that don't add up." Nathaniel glanced at his closed office door, lowering his voice. "Can we meet?" Later that morning, Nathaniel sat in a worn leather booth at Joey's Diner, a place far enough from the courthouse to avoid prying eyes. The coffee was bitter, but it gave his hands something to do while he waited. Marcus arrived exactly on time, still wearing his detective's badge on his belt. He looked older than Nathaniel remembered, with more gray at his temples and deeper lines around his eyes. They exchanged awkward nods as Marcus slid into the booth. "So," Marcus said, ordering coffee with a gesture to the waitress, "explain." Nathaniel laid out the story: Veronica's appearance in his courtroom, the DNA test, Maria's death, and the missing files. Marcus listened without interruption, his detective's eyes taking in every detail. "Her previous foster mother," Nathaniel continued. "Veronica mentioned something about late-night phone calls. She'd overhear them sometimes." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "What kind of calls?" "That's just it. Veronica says the woman would speak very quietly, always after midnight. She'd pace in the kitchen for hours sometimes." "Could be nothing," Marcus said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "Or it could be everything." The waitress refilled their cups and both brothers waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. "Look," Marcus said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I can't officially investigate without cause, but I still have contacts, people who owe me favors. Give me a few days to ask around." Back at home that afternoon, Veronica sat at the kitchen table, carefully smoothing out a crumpled piece of paper. Nathaniel watched as she pushed it toward him. "I tried to write to Mama's friend," she explained, her voice small. "The one who was supposed to help us move away. But they never came." Nathaniel picked up the paper. The childish handwriting was smudged, but he could make out the words, "Please help. Mama is scared." "When did you write this?" he asked gently. "Before..." Veronica's voice caught. Before the accident, Mama said her friend would know what to do, but then she trailed off, her small hands clasping together tightly. Nathaniel carefully folded the note and placed it in his pocket. He knelt beside Veronica's chair, making sure to meet her eyes. "I promise you, Veronica, we're going to figure this out. You're safe now." She nodded, and for a moment Nathaniel saw Maria in the determined set of her jaw. He stood up, his resolve strengthening. Whatever his brother might uncover, whatever dangers lurked in Veronica's past, he would face them head-on. The evening air grew thick with tension as Marcus Hale's unmarked police car idled beneath the concrete overpass. Streetlights cast irregular shadows through the pillars, making the scene feel even more clandestine. Inside the car, Marcus handed his brother a worn manila folder, his face grim in the dim light. "What you're about to see," Marcus warned, "isn't pretty, but you need to know what we're dealing with." Nathaniel Carter opened the folder with steady hands, though his heart hammered in his chest. Page after page revealed partially redacted documents, but what remained visible told a chilling story. Bank statements showed large, unexplained deposits. Photographs captured late-night meetings between Veronica's former foster parents and well-dressed individuals whose faces were carefully turned away from security cameras. "These people," Marcus explained, pointing to a particular series of transactions, "they're connected to a network we've been trying to crack for years. Child trafficking, money laundering, the works. But every time we get close, someone higher up shuts us down." Nathaniel's throat went dry. "And Veronica's foster family was involved?" "Up to their necks," Marcus confirmed, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "But here's the kicker. They had protection. High-level protection. The kind that comes from inside the system." Later that evening, Nathaniel sat in his living room, the weight of Marcus's revelations heavy on his shoulders. Veronica perched beside him on the couch, her small frame seeming even tinier in the growing darkness. She clutched her favorite blanket, a purple fleece that had become her security object since moving in. "Veronica," he began carefully, "can you tell me more about what your mama warned you about? About people you shouldn't trust?" Veronica's fingers tightened on the blanket. She said to be careful of people in robes." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "She said some of them pretend to help, but they're really bad. Especially the lady." Nathaniel felt his blood run cold. "The lady?" "The one who smiled like it hurt," Veronica said, her eyes distant with memory. "Mama saw her at court once. She came home crying that day." The description hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. He'd seen that same painful smile countless times on Judge Angela Morrison's face. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrifying pattern. In his bedroom that night, Nathaniel sat on the edge of his bed, holding the photograph of himself and Maria from years ago. They looked so young, so unaware of what lay ahead. Maria's smile was genuine and warm, nothing like the artificial expression Morrison wore like a mask. He traced Maria's face with his finger, understanding now why she had kept their relationship secret, why she had never told him about Veronica. She hadn't been trying to hide their daughter from him. She had been trying to protect her from something far more sinister. The photograph trembled slightly in his hands as anger and determination coursed through him. Maria had died trying to keep their daughter safe, and now it was his turn to take up that fight. Whatever the cost to his career, whatever risks he might face, he would see this through. He owed it to Maria's memory and to Veronica's future. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky, reminding him of how vast and complex the web of corruption might be. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had Marcus, he had evidence, and most importantly, he had the truth starting to emerge. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Nathaniel Carter watched Veronica carefully crack an egg into a bowl. Her small hands trembled slightly, but she managed not to drop any shells in with the yolk. "Just like that," he encouraged, reaching for another egg. "Your mama teach you how to cook?" A tiny smile played at the corners of Veronica's mouth as she nodded. Then, something unexpected happened. She laughed. It was soft and brief, but the sound filled the kitchen with warmth Nathaniel hadn't known was missing. "Mama always got shells in the eggs," Veronica shared, her voice carrying a hint of pride. "She said I was better at it than her." While they worked on breakfast together, Veronica began to hum, a gentle melody that seemed to flow naturally from her memories. Nathaniel noticed the worry lines in his own forehead softening as they settled into this simple morning routine, even though anxiety about the future still gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Across town, Marcus Hale crouched in a dimly lit alley, carefully examining documents from a weathered cardboard box. His informant had come through with files that had supposedly fallen off a records truck years ago. As he sifted through the papers, his trained eye caught patterns in seemingly innocent notations, dates that aligned with large bank deposits, case numbers that corresponded with suspicious foster care placements. Then he found it, a series of coded references to judicial interference in child placement cases. The pattern was subtle, but clear to someone who knew what to look for. Cases being redirected, paperwork conveniently lost, children placed with specific families despite red flags in their backgrounds. All of it pointed to high-level corruption, and at the center of it all was a judge who had been accepting bribes to manipulate the system. Marcus's jaw clenched as he thought of Judge Angela Morrison and her perfectly maintained facade of respectability. These documents might not be enough for a conviction, but they were certainly enough to start building a case. Later that afternoon, Clara Newman sat across from Nathaniel in his study, her expression serious as she reviewed her notes. "The custody review is scheduled for next week," she explained, looking up at him. "Given the unusual circumstances of this case, there will be extra scrutiny. The media attention hasn't helped." Nathaniel nodded, his hands clasped tightly on his desk. "What should I expect?" "They'll want to see that you're providing a stable environment," Clara said. "That despite the sudden nature of this situation, you're adapting and meeting Veronica's needs. The public interest in this case means every detail will be examined closely." Nathaniel glanced through his study door where he could see Veronica sitting in the living room with her school books. She looked up and gave him a small wave, which he returned with a gentle smile. The morning sun cast long shadows across Nathaniel Carter's front lawn as he stood on his porch, watching Ruth Harris's blue sedan pull into the driveway. Ruth, a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down, had been a godsend during these difficult days. Her kind face and gentle manner had immediately put both Nathaniel and Veronica at ease. "Good morning, Judge Carter," Ruth called out softly as she stepped from her car. "Ready for art class, Veronica?" Veronica emerged from behind Nathaniel, clutching her small backpack. She nodded, her eyes darting briefly to scan the street for unfamiliar cars or faces. Nathaniel's heart ached at how quickly she'd learned to be vigilant. "Remember what we talked about," Nathaniel said, kneeling to Veronica's level. "Mrs. Harris will stay with you the whole time, and I'll be there to pick you up right after class." "I know," Veronica whispered, managing a small smile. "You promised." As Ruth's car pulled away, Veronica waved from the back window. Nathaniel stayed on the porch until the car disappeared around the corner, checking one last time for any suspicious vehicles that might follow. At the children's art studio, sunlight streamed through large windows, creating cheerful patches of warmth on the wooden floor. Veronica sat at a table with 3 other children, each absorbed in their own watercolor creations. The art teacher, a woman with paint-splattered overalls and graying hair tied in a messy bun, moved between the tables offering gentle encouragement. Veronica dipped her brush in water, then touched it to the purple paint. With careful strokes, she began creating an unusual shape on her paper, something between a star and a heart, the colors bleeding together at the edges in a way that made the image seem to float. "That's beautiful, Veronica," the teacher said, pausing behind her chair. "Very creative." A genuine smile spread across Veronica's face and she sat up a little straighter. The girl next to her leaned over to look. "I like the purple," she said. "Want to share the blue?" Veronica nodded, sliding the blue paint closer to her new friend. For a moment, she looked like any other 8-year-old, lost in the simple joy of creating. Miles away, in an elegantly furnished apartment overlooking the city, Judge Angela Morrison paced across her plush carpet, her heels making soft impressions in the thick pile. The man seated on her leather sofa watched her with calculated patience, his expensive suit as impeccable as her own courtroom attire. "Carter and his detective brother are becoming problematic," Morrison said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're asking questions about old cases, looking into files that should have stayed buried." "The situation can be managed," the man replied smoothly, setting down his untouched glass of wine. "We have resources, connections. Evidence has a way of disappearing when necessary." Morrison stopped pacing, turning to face him. "I've spent years building this position. My reputation is everything." Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. "I will not let Nathaniel Carter and his newfound daughter destroy what I've worked for." "Then perhaps it's time for a more permanent solution," the man suggested, his tone casual but his eyes cold. "One that ensures your reputation remains untarnished." Morrison's expression hardened as she considered his words. The setting sun cast long shadows through her floor-to-ceiling windows, darkness creeping across the room like her own spreading influence. In the gray dawn light of an abandoned parking lot, Detective Marcus Hale's weathered police cruiser sat idle between faded yellow lines. He passed a manila folder to his brother through the driver's window, his expression grim. "These documents tell an ugly story, Nate," Marcus said, keeping his voice low despite their isolation. "The Foster family that had Veronica? They were getting regular payments from an offshore account linked to a lawyer named James Preston. He's known for arranging adoptions that shouldn't happen." Nathaniel Carter's hands trembled as he flipped through bank statements and phone records. His jaw clenched at the sight of large deposits coinciding with custody case dates. "These amounts, they're not small mistakes. This was organized." "Preston's got connections everywhere," Marcus added. "But here's what's interesting. There's a pattern of calls between his office and the courthouse, specifically during times when certain judges would have been presiding." Later that morning, Nathaniel sat in his home office, spreading the documents across his desk. Veronica curled up on the leather couch nearby, hugging a throw pillow to her chest as she watched him work. "Did Mommy have friends?" Veronica asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who helped her?" Nathaniel turned in his chair, meeting her uncertain gaze. "I wish I knew, sweetheart. Your mom was trying to protect you, and I'm working hard to understand exactly how she did that." Veronica nodded, her small fingers tracing patterns on the pillow. "She was scared sometimes, but she always said we'd be okay." In the courthouse, Judge Angela Morrison's office cast long shadows despite the afternoon sun. She loomed over the clerk's desk, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the polished wood. "These specific cases need to disappear from the system," Morrison commanded, sliding a list across the desk. "A simple computer glitch, nothing more." The clerk's hands shook as he typed, sweat beading on his forehead. "But Judge Morrison, these records are part of the permanent archive." "Are you questioning my authority?" Morrison's voice dropped dangerously low. "Remember who approved your daughter's scholarship recommendation?" The clerk's shoulders slumped in defeat as he began deleting files, each keystroke another victory in Morrison's campaign to erase her tracks. She smiled, satisfied that she still held enough power to keep her secrets buried. In a modest office filled with law books and the lingering scent of coffee, Nathaniel Carter leaned forward in his chair as Clara Newman spoke in hushed tones. "Maria came to me about 6 months before her accident," Clara said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "She was working as a cleaning lady at the Sunshine Children's Shelter. What she saw there—" Clara's voice trailed off. "Tell me everything," Nathaniel urged gently. Children would disappear overnight. No paperwork, no transfers on record. When Maria tried to file a formal complaint, it vanished. The next day, her supervisor claimed she never submitted anything. Clara's eyes met Nathaniel's. "Someone powerful made sure that complaint never saw the light of day." Nathaniel ran his hands over his face, his mind racing with the implications. "And you think this connects to the foster family placement system?" "I've worked social services for 15 years, Judge Carter. Things don't just vanish unless someone wants them to." Back at Nathaniel's home, The afternoon sun streamed through the windows as Ruth Harris visited with a small package wrapped in purple paper. Veronica sat cross-legged at the coffee table, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a leather-bound journal with rainbow edges. "Every girl needs a special place for her thoughts," Ruth said warmly, showing Veronica how the little lock worked. Veronica's fingers traced the journal's cover. "Thank you," she whispered, a small smile brightening her face. She opened it and began drawing delicate flowers with a pencil Ruth had included. Nathaniel watched from the doorway, his heart both warmed and heavy. This simple moment of childhood joy seemed precious against the darkness they were uncovering. Across town, in a corner booth at LeBlanc Restaurant, Judge Angela Morrison's perfectly painted lips curved into a frown as she spoke to her associate, a man in an expensive suit who barely touched his coffee. "Carter's digging too deep," Morrison hissed. "His brother, too. They're asking questions about Maria's accident." The associate's expression remained neutral. "What would you like done about it?" "He needs to understand the consequences of his curiosity." Morrison stirred her coffee slowly. A warning should suffice. Nothing too obvious, but enough to make him think twice about continuing this investigation. "Consider it handled," the associate replied, standing smoothly. He left Morrison alone with her coffee and her schemes, the restaurant's dim lighting casting shadows across her face. In the dim light of Marcus Hale's cluttered office, an informant sat hunched forward, their face obscured by a worn hood. The morning sun barely penetrated the dusty blinds, casting long shadows across scattered case files and empty coffee cups. "Maria wasn't just cleaning that shelter," the informant whispered, voice trembling. "She found documents, lists of kids, dates, prices." They paused, glancing nervously at the door. "When she tried to report it, someone high up made sure she couldn't talk. That accident, it wasn't random." Marcus's hand shook as he scribbled notes, his normally steady cop's grip betraying his anger. "And Morrison's connection?" "Her name kept coming up in conversations. Always careful, always hidden behind layers of people. But there." Later that morning, Nathaniel Carter's car idled outside the art center, the engine's quiet hum matching his racing thoughts. Veronica sat in the back seat, her small hands carefully holding open the journal Ruth had given her. "Look," she said softly, turning the journal toward him. The page showed a crude drawing of what looked like the scales of justice, but with an angry slash cutting through them. It was on the wall in the big house, the one before. Nathaniel's throat tightened as he studied the drawing. "The foster home?" Veronica nodded, her fingers tracing the slash mark. "In the hallway upstairs. The grown-ups would look at it when they came to visit." Outside the courthouse that afternoon, a swarm of reporters descended on Nathaniel and Veronica as they approached the entrance. Camera flashes burst like lightning around them. "Judge Carter, how do you respond to claims about your mental stability? Are you fit to be a father? Sources say you've been acting erratically." Nathaniel pulled Veronica closer, shielding her with his body as they pushed through the crowd. His face remained impassive, but his jaw clenched tight. Morrison's handiwork was obvious in every shouted question, every accusation thinly disguised as concern. Veronica pressed against his side, her small hand gripping his suit jacket. She'd grown quieter since the reporters had started camping outside their home, but her trust in him showed in the way she stayed close, letting him guide her through the chaos. Inside the courthouse's marble lobby, Nathaniel knelt down to Veronica's level. "You okay?" She nodded, brave despite her trembling lips. "I know they're just being mean because of the bad lady." Nathaniel's heart swelled with pride at her perceptiveness, even as worry gnawed at his stomach. Morrison's campaign to discredit him was gaining momentum, but the emblem in Veronica's drawing might be the key to exposing everything. The early morning courthouse corridor stretched empty and silent, its marble floors reflecting the dim fluorescent lights. Detective Marcus Hale's footsteps echoed as he approached Judge Angela Morrison, who was walking briskly toward her chambers. "Judge Morrison, a moment of your time?" His voice carried a sharp edge beneath its professional tone. Morrison turned, her perfectly painted smile never reaching her eyes. Detective Hale, what brings you to my corner of the courthouse? Missing records from the Children's Services database, specifically cases you presided over. Marcus kept his voice low but firm. Seems like quite a few files disappeared right when we started looking into them. Really? Morrison's smile widened. Computer systems can be so unreliable these days. I'm sure IT is handling it. Their eyes locked in silent combat. Marcus stepped closer. We both know what's really going on. It's just a matter of time before we prove it. Prove what, Detective? Morrison's smirk remained fixed. Be careful with unfounded accusations. They can damage promising careers. In Nathaniel Carter's home office later that morning, Clara Newman spread documents across his desk. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating scattered papers and case files. Keep it simple during the review, Clara advised, tapping a folder. Focus on Veronica's improved emotional state, her school attendance, the stable environment you provide. We can't show our full hand yet. Nathaniel nodded, running a hand over his tired face. But the trafficking evidence will come later, Clara interrupted gently. Right now, Veronica needs you as her father, not just as the judge fighting corruption. The afternoon light cast long shadows in the living room as Veronica sat beside Nathaniel on the couch, her small hands twisted in her lap as she spoke. Mommy knew you'd help, Veronica whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The night before the accident, she told me, if you find your daddy, he will stop them. She said you always did the right thing. Nathaniel knelt before her, his heart aching. Your mommy was very brave, Veronica, and so are you. He took her small hands in his. I promise you, I will make it right. Veronica squeezed his hands, a tear rolling down her cheek. I know, Daddy, she said softly, using the word for the first time. Early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in Nathaniel Carter's study, casting striped shadows across the scattered papers on his desk. He rubbed his tired eyes, reviewing his opening statement for the upcoming custody review hearing. Veronica has shown remarkable progress, he murmured, practicing the words. Her emotional well-being, academic performance, and social adjustment all demonstrate positive growth in a stable environment. He paused, carefully inserting a subtle reference to his broader concerns. The court's duty extends beyond simple placement. We must ensure every child in our system receives the protection and oversight they deserve. At noon, Marcus Hale's cramped apartment smelled of cheap coffee. The detective paced, his instant coffee growing cold in its chipped mug. Morrison's people are getting desperate, Marcus warned, his voice low and urgent. They might try to plant something, create a scene, anything to make you look unfit. Nathaniel's fingers tightened around his own coffee cup. I won't let them use Veronica as a pawn in their game. Just watch your back, Marcus insisted. Document everything. Keep security cameras running. Don't give them any openings. The evening brought a gentler moment in Nathaniel's kitchen. The warm aroma of tomato sauce and garlic bread filled the air as Veronica twirled spaghetti on her fork. You know, Nathaniel began, a small smile playing at his lips. When Uncle Marcus and I were kids, we once tried to make pasta from scratch. Veronica looked up, curiosity brightening her eyes. We made such a mess, he continued, chuckling at the memory. Flour everywhere. Mom came home to find us covered head to toe, looking like two little ghosts. A giggle escaped Veronica's lips, soft and precious. The sound filled the kitchen, making Nathaniel's heart swell. For just a moment, they weren't a judge, and his newfound daughter caught in a dangerous investigation. They were simply family, sharing dinner and laughter. Meanwhile, in her elegant home office, Judge Angela Morrison's manicured fingers gripped her phone tightly. Her associate's words sent a chill down her spine. Someone's talking. They're willing to testify about the whole operation. Morrison's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. Find out who, she hissed into the phone, and handle it. Now. The morning sun had barely risen when Nathaniel Carter found the envelope. His fingers trembled as he picked up the plain white paper that had been slipped under his front door. Inside, the typed message was brief but chilling. Stop digging or she'll suffer. His heart hammered against his ribs as he quickly locked the door, double-checking every window. He rushed upstairs to check on Veronica, his footsteps heavy with worry. Relief flooded through him when he found her sitting cross-legged on the floor of her room, peacefully coloring in her journal. The morning light caught her dark curls as she concentrated on her drawing, completely unaware of the threat that had just entered their lives. Later that afternoon, in a dusty corner of the city library's study room, Marcus Hale sat across from a nervous-looking informant. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting uncertain shadows on the scratched wooden table between them. "I have video proof," the informant whispered, glancing around. "Shows Morrison meeting with known traffickers. But I need guaranteed immunity." Marcus leaned forward, his voice equally low. "If what you're saying is true, I'll do everything I can to protect you. We need this evidence." As evening settled over Nathaniel's home, he sat at his desk surrounded by legal papers and case notes. The weight of tomorrow's custody review pressed heavily on his shoulders. Soft footsteps caught his attention as Veronica entered his office, clutching something in her small hands. Without a word, she approached his desk and carefully placed Maria's photograph beside his scattered documents. The image showed Maria's gentle smile, a reminder of everything at stake. Nathaniel placed his hand on Veronica's shoulder, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Veronica leaned slightly against his arm, both of them drawing strength from each other's presence. The photograph seemed to watch over them, Maria's frozen smile a testament to the justice they sought together. The morning dawned with a heavy silence over Nathaniel Carter's home. In the soft light of his bedroom mirror, he helped Veronica tie Maria's pale blue ribbon in her hair. His large hands, usually so steady in court, trembled slightly as he smoothed the delicate fabric. Veronica watched their reflection, her small fingers reaching up to touch the ribbon, drawing comfort from this piece of her mother. Without words, Veronica slipped her hand into Nathaniel's, giving it a gentle squeeze. The gesture spoke volumes: trust, fear, hope all wrapped into one simple touch. They walked to his car together, their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning air. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity. Camera flashes burst like lightning as Nathaniel guided Veronica through the crowd of reporters. Their shouted questions bounced off the marble walls. "Judge Carter, how do you respond to allegation? Is it true that... What about the claims?" Nathaniel kept his eyes forward, one hand protectively on Veronica's shoulder as they navigated through the press of bodies. Clara Newman appeared at their side, clutching a thick folder of supporting documents. Her presence created a small buffer between them and the chaos. Professor Elaine Brooks, her silver hair neatly styled and wearing her most professional suit, stood waiting near the courtroom doors. She had known Nathaniel since his law school days and had volunteered immediately to testify to his character. Her kind eyes met Veronica's, offering a reassuring smile. In a quiet alcove nearby, Detective Marcus Hale pressed his phone closer to his ear, speaking in hushed tones. 3 o'clock sharp, behind the old library. Don't be late. He watched as Nathaniel and Veronica made their way into the courtroom, his jaw set with determination. The evidence he would collect that afternoon had to reach them in time. Everything depended on it. Veronica's hand drifted up to touch her ribbon once more as they approached the courtroom doors. The simple strip of fabric seemed to carry Maria's strength, her love, her hope for justice. Nathaniel noticed the gesture and felt his resolve strengthen. Today would determine not just custody, but the course of their future together. The grand courtroom fell silent as Judge Carla Thompson took her seat, her silver-rimmed glasses catching the morning light. She adjusted her robes with practiced precision, then surveyed the room with keen eyes that had presided over countless family cases. In the matter of custody regarding Veronica Hayes, Judge Thompson's clear voice rang out. We will now begin. Mark Johnson, Nathaniel Carter's attorney, rose smoothly from his chair. His navy suit was crisp, his manner confident as he approached the bench with a thick folder of documents. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of the stable and nurturing environment Judge Carter has provided for Veronica over these past weeks. From her position in the gallery, Judge Angela Morrison sat rigid, her manicured nails pressing into her leather portfolio. Her eyes never left the proceedings, calculating each moment like a chess player anticipating their next move. Veronica sat between Clara Newman and Professor Brooks, her small hands wrapped around the journal Ruth Harris had given her. She wore Maria's blue ribbon like a talisman, drawing strength from its presence. When the social worker placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, Veronica managed a tiny smile. "As you can see from these records," Mark Johnson continued, displaying charts and reports on the courtroom's projection screen, "Veronica's school attendance has been perfect. Her teachers note increased participation in class activities, and her health checkups show marked improvement in sleep patterns and appetite." Judge Thompson studied the documents carefully, occasionally glancing at Veronica over her glasses. The girl's quiet dignity seemed to touch something in the veteran judge's expression. When Professor Elaine Brooks took the stand, her testimony carried the weight of decades of academic and personal observation. "I've known Nathaniel Carter since he was a law student," she stated firmly. "His dedication to justice has never wavered. But more importantly, I've witnessed his interaction with Veronica. The bond they've formed is genuine and nurturing." Judge Angela Morrison's lip curled slightly at this, her hand moving to her phone as if itching to set something in motion. The morning light cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the tension in her jaw. During the brief recess, the courthouse corridor buzzed with whispered conversations. Nathaniel Carter found a quiet corner where he could speak privately with Veronica. Kneeling down to her level, his judicial authority replaced by fatherly concern, he smiled gently. "You're doing so well," he whispered, straightening her ribbon with careful fingers. "I know this is scary, but remember what I told you? Whatever happens in there, we're a family now," Veronica finished softly, clutching her journal closer to her chest. The words seemed to give her strength, and she stood a little straighter. Clara Newman watched this exchange from a respectful distance, making notes in her file that would later support the obvious bond forming between father and daughter. The social worker's experienced eyes saw what the court needed to understand, that sometimes family was found rather than born, and that love could grow in the most unexpected circumstances. Professor Brooks approached them, her presence adding another layer of support to their small group. She gave Veronica an encouraging wink before they all turned to re-enter the courtroom, ready to face whatever challenges the afternoon session might bring. In the courthouse hallway, Judge Angela Morrison leaned casually against the marble wall, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke to James Mitchell, a veteran journalist known for his explosive headlines. "It's concerning, really," she murmured, maintaining an air of professional concern. "Those old case files from Judge Carter's early career. Let's just say his temperament wasn't always as controlled as it appears now." Mitchell's eyes lit up with the promise of a story. He nodded quickly, already typing notes into his phone before hurrying away. Morrison allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she watched him disappear around the corner. Inside the courtroom, Sarah Peters, the court-appointed child advocate, stood at the witness stand. Her testimony painted a clear picture of Veronica's progress. "In the weeks since living with Judge Carter, Veronica's academic performance has shown remarkable improvement," Peters stated, referring to her notes. "Her teachers report she's more engaged in class discussions, and her homework completion rate has increased significantly." Nathaniel Carter sat at the counsel table, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he listened to the positive report. Beside him, Mark Johnson made careful notes while Judge Thompson leaned forward, clearly interested in the details of Veronica's progress. "Furthermore," Peters continued, "Veronica's emotional well-being appears more stable. She's forming healthy attachments and showing signs of trust, which is crucial for children who have experienced trauma." Across the street, in the dim confines of a parking garage, Detective Marcus Hale's footsteps echoed as he approached a dark van on the third level. The informant, a thin figure in a gray hoodie, emerged from behind the vehicle, constantly glancing over their shoulder. "This is everything," the informant whispered, pressing a small flash drive into Marcus's palm. Their hands trembled during the exchange. The video shows Morrison meeting with the traffickers. There's financial records too, proving she took payment to keep cases quiet. Marcus gripped the drive tightly, his jaw set with determination. "You're sure about this?" "Watch your back," the informant warned, already backing away. Morrison's reach goes deeper than anyone knows. She's got people everywhere. Marcus slipped the drive into his inner jacket pocket, his mind racing with plans to get this crucial evidence to Nathaniel Carter without alerting Morrison's watchful eyes. He moved quickly toward the garage exit, each step echoing with the weight of what he now carried. In his dimly lit apartment, Marcus Hale's hands shook slightly as he inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing folders filled with video files and documents. He clicked on the first video, and his breath caught in his throat. There was Judge Angela Morrison, clear as day, sitting in what appeared to be a private dining room. She spoke in hushed tones with two well-dressed individuals, discussing placement fees and special arrangements for certain foster children. Marcus watched as she accepted an envelope, carefully counting its contents before nodding in satisfaction. "Got you," he whispered, quickly copying the files to a secure backup drive. The evidence was irrefutable, Morrison's careful facade of judicial propriety crumbling with each damning frame. In the courtroom, Mark Johnson stood at the podium, his presentation drawing to a close. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Judge Carter provides a stable, nurturing environment for Veronica. Their bond, though new, is genuine and growing stronger each day." At the defendant's table, Veronica hunched over her journal, her small hand moving across the page. Tears dropped silently onto the paper as she recreated the mysterious emblem from her past, the twisted scales of justice that had haunted her memories. Her fingers trembled as she thought of Maria's last words, her mother's final attempt to protect her. Judge Thompson began gathering her notes, preparing to move into deliberation, when Judge Morrison's voice cut through the quiet rustling of papers. "Your Honor," Morrison stood, her voice smooth as silk. "As an officer of the court observing these proceedings, I feel compelled to request clarification on certain testimony presented today." Judge Thompson's eyebrows rose. "This is highly unusual, Judge Morrison." "I understand, Your Honor, but given the sensitive nature of this case and its potential implications for our family court system, I believe it's crucial we examine all angles thoroughly." In the courthouse lobby, as the evening shadows lengthened, Nathaniel Carter placed a gentle hand on Veronica's shoulder. The day's proceedings had taken their toll on both of them. "Will we be okay?" Veronica's voice was barely above a whisper. Nathaniel pulled her into a protective embrace. "Yes, I promise," he said, though doubt gnawed at his insides. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Marcus Hale's name flashed on the screen. "Nate." Marcus's voice was urgent and low. "I have something that changes everything. Meet me as soon as you can." In a quiet corner booth of Murphy's Diner, Marcus Hale slid his laptop across the worn Formica table. Nathaniel Carter leaned forward, his coffee forgotten as the video played. His hands clenched into fists as he watched Judge Morrison's casual corruption unfold on the screen. "She's been doing this for years," Marcus said softly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "These videos show at least 3 separate meetings where she arranged foster placements for money." Nathaniel Carter's jaw worked as he processed the implications. "This is what Maria discovered," he whispered. "This is what she died trying to expose." "We need to be smart about this," Marcus cautioned, closing the laptop. "Federal authorities will want a clean chain of evidence. If we move too soon, Morrison might destroy more records or worse." Back at Nathaniel Carter's home office, Mark Johnson paced as he considered the flash drive's contents. Morning light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across his worried face. "The custody ruling has to come first," Mark insisted, running a hand through his graying hair. "If we reveal this now, Morrison will either flee or lash out. We need to secure Veronica's placement with you before we move against her." Nathaniel Carter stood by the window, conflict evident in his stance. "Every day we wait is another day she might hurt more children. And if we move too soon, we risk everything, including Veronica's safety," Mark reminded him gently. "We do this right, or we don't do it at all." In the living room, Veronica sat cross-legged on the couch, Maria's photograph held carefully in her small hands. "We found him, Mama," she whispered, her finger tracing her mother's smile. "Just like you said we would." She opened her journal, flipping through pages filled with her artwork. Flowers bloomed across one page, stars sparkled on another. She paused at a recent drawing, a large hand holding a smaller one. Though she didn't fully understand the tension around her, she felt safer than she had in a long time. Nathaniel Carter appeared in the doorway, his tie perfectly straight, his expression gentle despite the morning's revelations. "Ready to go, sweetheart?" Veronica nodded, carefully tucking both the photograph and journal into her backpack. She stood and took his offered hand, ready to face another day in court. The final day of the custody review dawned with an electric tension in the air. The courthouse buzzed with activity as journalists clustered near the entrance, their voices a constant murmur of speculation about rumors of corruption within the system. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Carla Thompson's gavel brought instant silence. Her stern expression commanded attention as she called Veronica to the stand. Clara Newman gently guided the little girl forward, while Judge Angela Morrison watched from her seat, her face a mask of calculated indifference. Nathaniel Carter's breath caught in his throat as Veronica approached the witness stand. She looked so small there, her feet barely touching the floor, but her spine was straight and her chin held high. "Veronica," Judge Thompson spoke kindly, leaning forward slightly. "Could you tell me how you're feeling in your new home?" "Yes, Your Honor," Veronica replied, her voice soft but clear. "I feel safe there. Judge Carter, my daddy, he reads me stories every night, and he listens when I talk about my mama." A tissue rustled somewhere in the gallery. Even a few reporters dabbed at their eyes. "Do you miss your mother?" Judge Thompson asked gently. Veronica nodded, her fingers touching the pocket where she kept Maria's photograph. "I do. But Mama told me to find my daddy, and I did. She said he would keep me safe, and she was right." Judge Angela Morrison rose suddenly, attempting to interject with a carefully crafted question about Nathaniel Carter's qualifications, but Clara Newman stepped forward first. "Your Honor," Clara spoke with passionate conviction, "I've observed Judge Carter's home environment extensively. The changes in Veronica are remarkable. She's thriving in his care, showing improved academic performance, better sleep patterns, and most importantly, she's beginning to trust again. This is exactly the stable, loving environment she needs." Judge Thompson nodded thoughtfully, then thanked Veronica for her testimony. "I will deliver my decision by end of day," she announced, her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. As the court recessed, Judge Morrison slipped out silently through a side door. Nathaniel Carter remained seated beside Veronica, their hands clasped together. The little girl leaned against his arm, both of them waiting quietly for the decision that would shape their future. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Carla Thompson returned to the bench. Every eye followed her movements as she settled into her chair and arranged her papers with deliberate care. The gallery fell into a deep silence, broken only by the soft rustle of clothing as people leaned forward in anticipation. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, Judge Thompson began, her voice clear and authoritative. "I find that Judge Nathaniel Carter has demonstrated himself to be a fit and proper guardian for Veronica. The stability and nurturing environment he provides, coupled with the clear emotional bond that has developed between them, serves the child's best interests." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sounds of approval. Veronica's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Nathaniel Carter, who struggled to maintain his composure. "Therefore," Judge Thompson continued, "I hereby grant permanent custody to Judge Nathaniel Carter, with all rights and responsibilities therein." The gallery erupted in quiet cheers and whispers. Clara Newman squeezed Veronica's shoulder gently, while Nathaniel Carter wrapped an arm protectively around his daughter. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Judge Angela Morrison rose from her seat, her face twisted with barely contained rage. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice sharp and cutting through the celebratory atmosphere, "I must object to this ruling on grounds of impropriety. Judge Carter has orchestrated a calculated smear campaign against respected members of this court. His fitness as a guardian is severely compromised by these actions." The gallery's murmurs turned uneasy. Nathaniel Carter instinctively stepped in front of Veronica, shielding her from Morrison's venomous glare. Judge Thompson called for order, announcing a brief recess to address Morrison's accusations. As people began to move, Detective Marcus Hale slipped through the crowd with practiced ease. He passed a folded note to Mark Johnson, Nathaniel's attorney. Johnson read it quickly, his eyebrows rising slightly, and gave a short, determined nod. Johnson turned to Nathaniel Carter, speaking in low, urgent tones. The moment had come to reveal what they knew about Morrison's corruption. Nathaniel Carter straightened his shoulders, ready to protect his daughter not just with love, but with truth. The courtroom settled back into tense silence as Mark Johnson rose from his seat, his movements measured and deliberate. He approached the bench, straightening his tie. "Your Honor," he addressed Judge Thompson, "for Veronica's continued safety and protection, I must request permission to present newly discovered evidence that bears directly on this case and others like it." Judge Thompson's eyebrows furrowed. "Mr. Johnson, this is highly irregular at this stage. I understand, Your Honor, but this evidence reveals a pattern of corruption that directly threatens the well-being of children in our system, including Veronica." After a moment's consideration, Judge Thompson nodded. "Proceed with caution, Mr. Johnson." Mark Johnson gestured to a court officer, who wheeled in a screen and projector. Veronica pressed closer to Nathaniel Carter, who wrapped his arm protectively around her shoulders. The video began to play. The grainy footage showed Judge Angela Morrison in various clandestine meetings, her voice clear as she discussed placement fees and special arrangements. The evidence was damning. Morrison accepting envelopes of cash, signing documents after midnight meetings, orchestrating the movement of children through suspicious channels. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Judge Thompson's face hardened as she watched. Morrison, from her seat, grew increasingly pale. "This is outrageous!" Morrison suddenly shrieked, jumping to her feet. She made a desperate dash toward the side exit, but Detective Marcus Hale was faster. He and the bailiff moved in perfect synchronization, blocking her escape route. "Judge Angela Morrison," Marcus announced firmly, "you need to remain here." "You don't understand," Morrison protested, her polished facade cracking. "This is all a misunderstanding." But her voice had lost its usual authority, replaced by barely contained panic. Order in this court!" Judge Thompson's gavel crashed down repeatedly as the gallery erupted in shocked exclamations. Veronica buried her face against Nathaniel Carter's side, and he held her close, shielding her from the chaos. The bailiff firmly gripped Morrison's arm as she continued to protest, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "This court will recess immediately," Judge Thompson declared over the commotion, "and I am ordering an immediate investigation into these allegations. Bailiff, please ensure Judge Morrison remains in custody." The autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows of Nathaniel Carter's living room as Clara Newman arrived with two unexpected visitors. Henry and Loretta James, both in their mid-60s, stood nervously in the entryway, their eyes searching the room with hopeful anticipation. "Judge Carter," Clara said softly, "these are Veronica's paternal grandparents." Veronica peeked out from behind Nathaniel Carter's arm, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. Loretta James's eyes welled with tears at the sight of her granddaughter, seeing traces of Maria in the child's features. Henry and Loretta knelt down slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hello, Veronica," Henry said, his voice gentle. "We've been hoping to meet you." Loretta opened an old photo album she'd brought, revealing pictures of a young Maria playing in a sunny backyard. "That's your mama when she was about your age," Loretta explained, her voice trembling with emotion. Later that afternoon, on the porch, Henry James spoke privately with Nathaniel Carter, while Loretta and Clara showed Veronica more family photographs inside. "We only learned about everything through the news coverage," Henry explained, his weathered hands clasped together. "If we had known about Maria's situation, about Veronica..." His voice cracked. "We want to give her a real childhood away from all this media attention and legal drama. We have a home in a quiet town, with a big yard and good schools." Loretta joined them, wiping tears from her eyes. "We can give her the privacy and stability she needs, a chance to just be a little girl, without reporters and courthouse visits." After the grandparents left, Veronica sat with Nathaniel Carter on the living room couch. She held Maria's photograph, studying it carefully. "Do you like them?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel Carter touched her shoulder gently. "Yes, they seem very kind and loving." Veronica traced her finger over Maria's image in the photograph. "Would Mama want me to be with them?" she whispered. Nathaniel Carter felt tears filling his eyes as he looked at this child he'd grown to love so deeply. The answer stuck in his throat, knowing what it might mean for both of them. The morning sunlight filtered through the study windows as Nathaniel Carter sat at his desk, holding the worn photograph of himself and Maria. Their young faces smiled back at him, full of hope and promise. His heart ached as he traced Maria's image with his finger, wondering if she would approve of his decision. With a deep breath, he rose and walked to Veronica's room. His knock was gentle. "Veronica? Can we talk?" Inside her room, Veronica sat cross-legged on her bed, drawing in the journal Ruth Harris had given her. Nathaniel Carter settled beside her, choosing his words carefully. "Your grandparents can give you something I can't," he began softly. "A quiet life, away from all the reporters and courthouse drama. A real home with family traditions and stories about your mama." Veronica's lower lip trembled. "But you're my family too." "Yes, always," he said, pulling her close as tears rolled down his cheeks. "But sometimes loving someone means doing what's best for them, even when it hurts." At noon, Clara Newman arrived with the custody papers. The living room felt heavy with emotion as she spread the documents across the coffee table. Veronica sat nearby, clutching Maria's photograph, her face set in a brave expression that made her look so much like her mother. "You're doing an incredibly selfless thing," Clara said quietly to Nathaniel Carter as he picked up the pen. His hand shook slightly as he signed the papers. Each signature felt like both a goodbye and a gift. The gift of giving Veronica the childhood she deserved. Later, they stood together on the front steps. Veronica wrapped her arms around Nathaniel Carter's waist, burying her face in his shirt. He held her close, memorizing the feeling of her small frame against his. "Thank you for being my daddy," Veronica whispered. Nathaniel Carter's voice was thick with emotion as he responded. "Always." They held each other, neither wanting to break the embrace, both understanding that while their living arrangement would change, their bond would remain unbreakable. Months passed like gentle waves, each one bringing more color and life to Veronica's world. The James family home, with its white picket fence and blooming garden, had become her sanctuary. Henry and Loretta James created the childhood haven she'd always deserved, filled with routine, warmth, and unconditional love. On a bright Saturday afternoon, the garden burst with late summer flowers. Veronica's laughter rang through the air as she soared on the wooden swing, her grandfather Henry pushing her higher with each gentle thrust. "Higher, Grandpa!" she called out, her braids dancing in the breeze. Loretta emerged from the house carrying a tray of fresh lemonade, her gray hair catching the sunlight. "Don't wear yourself out before our special visitor arrives," she reminded them with a knowing smile. Just then, the garden gate creaked open. Nathaniel Carter stepped through, his judicial robes replaced by casual weekend wear. His face lit up at the sight before him. "Daddy!" Veronica leaped from the swing mid-arc, landing surely on her feet before racing across the lawn. She threw herself into his waiting arms, and he lifted her in a warm embrace. "Look how tall you're getting," he said, his voice thick with joy. Inside the house, Veronica led Nathaniel to her art corner, where bright drawings covered the walls. Unlike her earlier sketches, these burst with vibrant colors and hopeful scenes, butterflies, rainbows, and gardens full of life. "I made these for Mama," Veronica explained, touching one particular drawing of yellow and pink flowers. "So she can see I'm happy now. Grandma says Mama's watching over us." As evening approached, they gathered in the garden. Henry and Loretta had prepared a special place under the porch light, a small table where they carefully placed Maria's framed photograph. The setting sun painted everything in soft gold as Veronica stepped forward to place a gentle kiss on the frame. Nathaniel Carter closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the moment wash over him. In the gentle breeze and the sound of crickets beginning their evening song, he felt Maria's presence among them, blessing this circle of love that had grown around their daughter. Several months had passed since Veronica found her new home with her grandparents, and Judge Nathaniel Carter settled back into his judicial duties with a transformed heart. His chambers, once stark and impersonal, now held warmth within its wooden walls. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, catching the edge of a silver frame that sat prominently on his desk. Inside that frame, 2 photographs told a story of love and redemption. On one side, Maria's gentle smile radiated maternal warmth. On the other, Veronica's recent school picture captured her growing confidence and joy. Between meetings and hearings, Nathaniel often found his gaze drawn to these images, drawing strength from their presence. "Your Honor," his clerk announced, "the Martinez foster care case is ready to begin." Nathaniel straightened his robes and gathered his papers. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, but it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a sacred trust. The courtroom hadn't changed, same polished benches, same formal atmosphere, but Nathaniel saw it through new eyes. As he took his place at the bench, sunlight filtered through the high windows, much like that first day with Veronica. The parallel wasn't lost on him. Before him stood a nervous 12-year-old boy, Marcus Martinez, flanked by his social worker. The case details echoed with familiar themes: a child caught in the system's complexity, future hanging in the balance. "Please proceed," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying a gentleness that hadn't been there before. The lawyers presented their arguments, but Nathaniel paid special attention to Marcus's body language, remembering how Veronica's silent signals had told a deeper story than any legal brief. When the boy's social worker spoke about placement options, Nathaniel asked thoughtful questions about the child's emotional needs, not just the procedural requirements. "Son, and how does Marcus feel about this arrangement?" he asked, directing his attention to the boy himself. The gallery noticed the shift. This wasn't the same strictly procedural judge they'd known before. During the afternoon session, as arguments concluded, Nathaniel took a moment to ensure Marcus understood what was happening. The boy's relief at being acknowledged was visible, reminding Nathaniel of how Veronica had blossomed when finally heard and understood. The day drew to a close, and golden afternoon light filled the courtroom. As Nathaniel prepared to adjourn, his eyes drifted to the photograph on his desk. Maria's smile seemed to approve of the man he'd become, while Veronica's image reminded him why every child deserved a champion. The sound of his gavel echoed through the chamber, but it wasn't just marking the end of another day. It punctuated a promise kept, a promise to Maria, to Veronica, and to himself. The sunlight caught the edge of his nameplate, and for a moment the title judge seemed less about authority and more about the sacred duty to protect those who needed protection most. Court staff gathered their papers, lawyers collected their briefcases, but Nathaniel remained seated for a moment longer. The warmth of the late afternoon sun wrapped around him like a gentle reminder of the love that had changed him forever. If you enjoyed the story of Judge Nathaniel and Veronica, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.